Get started. We respect everybody's time and jump right in. Those that are a few minutes late will join us. Welcome to our sixth meeting. We'll continue on with our sections tonight. We've got natural resources and transportation. We'll go through some of those items we've covered already, so we'll kind of hit a highlight of that. But first, I wanted to welcome Chris Bilo, our Director of Recreation. He'll give us a little update on where he is with Rec Master Plan and some of the online forum stuff that, the survey that he had. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, and then once he's done, questions, and then we'll jump back into our regular agenda.
Okay. So what I did for tonight is I just tried to prepare a couple of things. One is what we're doing currently in the department for our Recreation Master Plan update, kind of that process, where we're at, and sort of our timeline moving forward. Some of the things that have gone into that, including our survey, just try to give some idea, give you some sense of what kind of information we received back from the survey. And then I did bring some program information, so if people have specific questions in regards to things that we do within the department, if you're not familiar with some of the programs that we offer, or the number of programs, or even the types of programs, I hopefully should be able to answer most of those questions for you tonight. So I apologize, my voice is a little shot. I've been home sick for the last couple of days, but finally made it back to the office yesterday, so I'll try to manage through this best I can. So if you have questions too as I go through this, just let me know. For a lot of this stuff, it's obviously very second nature for what I do every day, and sometimes forget that people don't understand, what we do on a daily basis. So if there's anything that you just want some clarity to, feel free to ask it. If I can't answer it tonight, I'll be happy to get the answer for you and get back to you. So the current master plan that we're updating right now, we update about every 5 years. We try to do it every 5 years. This one we're at about 5.5 years. We did push it back and put it on hold versus doing it in 2017. We did start it in 2018 because we wanted to sort of get through the Shadow Pines property, that purchase, before we got started with our master plan. We didn't want that to sort of interrupt our flow. So we waited until that piece was taken care of. Also put us more in line with this plan, as well as the Shadow Pines Land Use Advisory Committee, their work. So all three pieces are sort of ongoing at the same time. So the last time that the rec plan was updated was back in 2012. We did that as an internal project as well. This update is also being done as an internal project. We have a committee where we reached out to very similar to this, where we reached out to the community, asked for anybody who would like to participate, and with that we ended up with 9 residents that have been selected and are on the committee. There are three staff from the recreation department. We've included our parks foreman on that committee. Then we also have one town board liaison that's on there. So our committee is about 14 people. We meet on a monthly basis. Sometimes we've met as many times as twice a month. December not as much, just because of the holidays. So the way that the process is unfolded for us is a little different than the last time that we did this update back in 2012. When we completed that update, what we really had was we had a real focus on what we were doing internally from program-wise. So we were really focused on what programs we were offering the community, and where we were missing and where we were lacking and where our shortfalls were with programs. So that was really the point of the emphasis of what we did back in 2012 with that update. This time, we've sort of put everything on the table in regards to this plan. And as a result, we came out of it with what we sort of designated as our 4 dimensions of recreation. And those are programs, parks, people, and facilities. So those 4 sub-components or subgroups sort of are going to make up the entire master plan. Each one of those subcommittees or subgroups has a committee out of those 14 people that have been meeting offline to sort of focus on just that dimension or that category. The intent is that when we're done, each one of those subcommittees will have at least one, if not multiple, recommendations as part of the master plan. So rather than what we've done previously, where we focused on our program offerings, this one we really wanted to make it as as sort of wide range or as encompassing as we possibly could. We just felt the need back in 2012 that was really where we needed to be from a department standpoint, was really kind of getting our programs in line. And I do have some of that data that I mentioned earlier. I can share that with you at the end, just so you guys can sort of get a gauge or an understanding of where we are in regards to the last several years with the programs that we offer. I think Zach actually has, if we do have a chance to get into it, Zach made a copy of some of those data reports or those data statistics that you can keep, and you can just kind of see what the department's done. So the process or the steps that we've taken so far. So we've been meeting since we started in May. We've been meeting, like I said, at least monthly, if not twice a month. We've had an online survey that we had open for our residents to be able to participate in. I'll go over some of that feedback here in a second. We've had one public input session that was offered at the end of November on a Wednesday evening. It was a a very informal session where we allowed residents just to come in. We had the room in the community center set up with the 4 components, and people were able to move around, talk to different people. We didn't want to make it a very formal session where people had to stand up and just read what they wanted in the master plan. We wanted more interaction, so the subcommittees actually interacted with the people that actually had an interest in that area. So if somebody strictly had a interest in facilities, they could talk to that group, versus if they didn't have any interest in parks, etc. The other part of that input, we did collect online input, so people were, if they weren't able to attend that session, they were able to still submit or turn in some of their feedback online. So we've gathered that information, and we're in the process now of putting together the survey results, the public input feedback, as well as the online feedback. So those 3 forms are where we're at right now in regards to what we've collected from the community. When we meet on the 22nd, one of the main agenda items is we've talked about having one additional, and we don't want to call it a public information forum, more of a focus group. Again, allow residents, if they have an interest in one of those 4 subcommittees or 4 dimensions, to be able to participate with specifically that group. So those sessions would be offered, obviously not at the same time, to allow people to attend multiple sessions if they wanted, but still another opportunity for people to be able to give their input. So that'll probably be the final way that we sort of gather that info before we put the report together. The timeline is we're hoping to have most of our data and most of our information put together no later than mid-February. So we're hoping within the next month, basically, to have most of our sessions or input pieces put together. All 4 of the subcommittees, or the 4 dimensions, they've all submitted their initial, I'll say, report or finding. So that information will be rolled up in regards to pulling out the recommendations for the master plan. Questions on the process and where we are compared to what we've done in the past? It's having a master plan done internally is a little unique, but I'll be the very first one to say I actually think it makes a lot more sense. A couple of reasons. One is we're able to identify right away, because we do it every day and we're involved with the residents every day in regards to programs. From a communication standpoint, there's nothing that's lost in regards to translation as to what kind of information is coming in. So we found that when we did it back in 2012, we had a really good understanding from our community kind of what their needs are or what their wants were in regards to our programs. So we're finding the exact same kind of thing as we go through this process. It's also a cost savings. Right now, to bring in a consultant for a master plan, it's I believe I think it was Pittsford that had one that had an update done recently. It's in the ballpark of $40,000 to $45,000 to have a consultant come in and put that together for you, where we think we can do just as good of a job internally, and again provide just as high quality a resource for the town for the next 5 years and beyond. Some of the survey information that was collected, I did pull out a few of the questions just to kind of give you guys an idea. It isn't a lengthy survey. There's only 21 questions that were actually on the survey. So it wasn't a long survey. The average survey response time took just about 7 minutes. So it wasn't, people weren't inundated with filling out information. There were 650 that were actually completed. That's up from the 2012 from 327. So we almost doubled what we did from 5 years ago. So we were pleased that, again, people were able to access the survey and provide their information. We use SurveyMonkey as our main operating tool to be able to collect that information, but we did have hard copies that people could use and submit into the rec office if they felt that was a more appropriate way for them to do it. Survey was open. We started it on 10/24 on October 24th, and we closed it on November 9th. So it was open for roughly 2.5 weeks. We tried to keep a shorter period. We didn't want it to extend out, and when I was going through some of the survey results, really a bulk of the feedback that we received started on 10/31, Halloween for some unknown reason, to the following week. So there was really about a 1 week span where we had the bulk of the community actually complete the survey. So that was the time frame. From respondents and some of the questions, excuse me, 93% of the people that actually completed it said that they were aware of the programs that we provide, which was good. But the next question was just as important, and that was 91% of those people actually participate. So we felt like we were getting good information from people who have an understanding of what the Recreation Department does. We weren't getting people who were just completing the survey for the act to complete the survey. So that was a significant sign or showing for us. One of the questions did ask for respondents to write out their interest in regards to programs, and we listed out there was 35 programs that were listed, 35 programs that were listed that they could choose from that they said that they had an interest in. There wasn't anything that I'd say that really sort of spiked or really reached above anything, any others. It was pretty consistent across the top for a number of programs. The highest number of programs or percentage was for health and wellness programs, and that rated out at 42%. 40% was performing arts or concerts, 39% were educational programs, 37% were fitness, and again, it just sort of gradually dropped from there. I think the lowest respondent activity that we had was wrestling, and I think that was like at 2%. So pretty typical to what we would have expected. Again, those are what I would call a general category. Health and wellness, performing arts, instead of being specific to an activity, such as baseball or soccer or drama or something like that. What's your overall? We did have a question in there because of the emphasis in our master plan with the facilities piece. We did have a question in there that was sort of geared towards gauging the interest in the community from a community center standpoint. And the question was phrased as, what's your overall opinion about an indoor recreation center? 57% of the respondents said Penfield should build a new facility. 31% would like to know more before deciding. So basically about 88% of the community was, I'll say, could potentially be in favor of if it was the correct facility. What was as a rec director and as the person that coordinates the programming in the community center, what was nice to see was we only had a 3% response that said no. So it wasn't the other way around where we had people saying no, we didn't want it. So that was a very favorable thing, because as we've been going through this process, we've identified our facility as being one of the areas that when we look at the programs that we provide, the space that we're providing is getting to become, from an inadequate standpoint, very noticeable. So that was nice to see, to be able to sort of see that come back. I did not print off because it would take us too long to go through, but there were many comments. Obviously, during the survey, people had an opportunity to be able to type in or input their comments, and that was probably the most commented piece, was that there needed to be additional space. It wasn't always specific to a gymnasium or anything like that, but it was that there needed to be additional space, and it could have been for specific activities such as pickleball, or it could be for just, education classroom type space, which is obviously a bulk of what we do, and there's obviously a shortage of that. There was a question in there overall that was phrased as overall, do you think the following facilities, programs, and activities provided by the Penfield Recreation are currently meeting the needs of the community? And that also included athletic fields. I know there's been a number of topics and discussions about the need for athletic fields and need for indoor space, so that's why we included athletic fields in that question. That one actually came back at about a 50-50 rate, which when you look at it on paper, you might say, okay, well, that's not so bad. 50% say, well, there's enough. 50% say that there's a shortage. What we tend to find is that people seem to be satisfied when games are scheduled and practices are scheduled, not understanding the issues that trying to get those games and practices scheduled has on our fields. That can include overlapping. That can include things as using fields to the point that they don't have a chance to rest or regenerate over different seasons. Also, it doesn't take into account that we've got activities going on that don't even technically fit a space or a program area that they're set up for. Activities that are at, such as Greenwood. The lacrosse program that takes place at Greenwood is really sort of outgrowing their space that's at that location. So the need for additional space is something that we see more internally as we try to schedule those rectangular fields. And then which park is visited the most? Wasn't much of a surprise that Rothfuss was the highest rated park from a visitation standpoint, followed by Veterans Memorial and Harrisville. It's what we would sort of expect to see just based on the amount of usage from activities and programs that are scheduled. So from a survey standpoint, I said there wasn't anything in there that I would highlight as being, overly critical or concerning. There was a lot of very good feedback as we've gone through the comment section. That's probably where we got most of our constructive feedback was from the comment section, people having an opportunity to actually input why they want to have a new gymnasium or what they think would be benefit of having a larger community room, those kind of things. So we were able to gather a lot of feedback through those comments. Questions on any of that? Yes.
Yeah, I have some questions about the survey itself and how it was constructed.
Mm-hmm.
You said you didn't hire an outside consultant, so it's nice savings of $40,000. But did you get input from anybody who does marketing research, or like a faculty member from a local college or something like that, about how?
The format actually is very similar to the one that we did in 2012. Some of the questions changed. Some of them, obviously a number of them stayed the same. I think we added 2 questions, one around the facilities and one additional question. But most of the questions stayed very similar to 2012. And when we did it back in 2012, we did actually have a group, or we had a representative that was on our committee at the time. And that was part of her responsibility, was she did do surveys. She did do analysis of surveys. So she was part of that process. So this year, because we didn't have that representative on the board, on the committee, we felt sticking with something very similar that we knew was already, I'll say, tested, and we knew was safe in regards to the type of questions that we were asking. We were comfortable with that process. As we started back in May, that was probably one of the first things we did in the first 2 meetings, was sort of focus on the survey, knowing that we were going to try to get that out late summer, early fall, so we would have the time to be able to gather.
Right. I guess one of the questions that I have, it's not so much the questions you came up with or how you came up with them, but I looked at the video that Zach sent us from your meeting with the Shadow Pines group. I looked at as much of it as I could. And you cited some of these same statistics, about 650 surveys, 91% of the people participating. And then you also cited, when you're talking about Rothfuss, that you were talking in general about some utilization of outdoor facilities, and you said on average 15 times per year.
That was what That was how the survey question and.
per survey respondent
Right.
for utilization of these outdoor facilities, which, so I guess where I'm kind of going with this is that it kind of seems like the population you reach is kind of skewed. You know, so you didn't really reach a representative sample of people in the town. You reached people who already use lots of recreation department services. And my own feeling is when I'm trying to find out like how I can improve something, I want to find out what needs I'm not meeting. Not when, you know, I don't want to, or kind of go to the choir and say, how do you like the music? You know, I want to find out what is it that I'm not reaching out, that I'm not touching with my services for people in the community who really, they might not even know about the survey. Many people I spoke to had no idea that the survey was out there because...
That's obviously a challenge that we've had, basically anytime we've asked for that input. We had, you know, similar challenges when we did our input session. You know, from a communication standpoint, it's always tough to be able to reach the people that, if they don't have a, well, I'll say vested interest in what's going on because they're not participating in a program or they're not visiting a park, if they're not a part of that segment, they may be missing or not receiving the necessary information to be able to give their feedback. I really don't know the easy answer to it. I wish I had an easy answer and say, you know, we know we didn't capture this group of people and their feedback, but the opportunity to provide it is what we tried to offer. And to my standpoint, we did a pretty good job from that. I mean, when we had 650 or whatever it was, plus or minus respondents, that at least showed that there's more people compared to the last time that we tried to put this out there. Would I have rather had 1,200 or 1,500 respondents? Absolutely. You know, if we would have kept it open any longer, could we have jumped that number or increased or gotten more people to participate? Possible. I mean, it was one of the major, I'll say, communication pieces that we had with our committee was when the survey went out was, don't rely on email or an e-news or a blurb in the Penfield Post to be able to get people to communicate. You know, with the people that are sitting at the table, they've got the contacts and the connections to be able to go out and reach people who may not participate or know what's going on. Because we hear that constantly in regards to not only a survey, but you know, some of the programs that we do. We've had an amphitheater behind the town hall here for going on 15 years, and every year we have people come in and say, I didn't even know this place was here. So it's a constant struggle to be able to get people to provide that feedback.
Right, but I don't think it's just up to your department to get the word out. I mean, I think a way that not just you as your department, but for any of the stuff that we're doing, you know, that the town, as the town, can often be the mouthpiece for this, to reach out to that broader community of people who don't touch on recreation stuff or don't touch on it very often. Maybe they're snowbirds and they are only here a certain time of year, that sort of thing.
I mean, we did.
But I guess what I'm just saying, Chris, is that if you base your actions now on data that is skewed, you're going to develop programs that, again, only reach the same subset of the population you've already been reaching.
I think the other piece to that is, and I don't want this to get confused, we're not going to make our recommendations solely on the 650 people that turned in their survey. There's way more information that we've collected, even over the course of the last 5 years, in the types of recommendations that should be going into this master plan. So it's not going to solely be, that's just sort of a byproduct of, you know, the processes. You know, that's going to be a piece of it.
So Chris, how was the survey, obviously through your program, the people that come to the centers and to the participate in the programs could see that? What were the other social media outlets? What are the ways were leveraged? And then I would open that question a little bit to the other folks on the board from the town perspective. How do you get that out to a broader audience? What's the normal town's approach for that?
The way that we kind of did, again, we did rely on, and we did ask that the 9 residents and then the staff and the people that are on there reach out to their groups or their organizations that they work with within Penfield and help sort of spread the word. But then on top of that, we reached out to any of the organizations or groups that we partner with or have any kind of affiliation with. Groups like Penfield Youth Football, Penfield Youth Lacrosse, Penfield Youth Baseball, Penfield Ecumenical Food Shelf, any of those organizations that we have any kind of a connection to, we reached out to them and said, this is the process that we're in right now. Currently, we're updating our master plan. Here's a link to our survey. Can you please share this? I know I got an email back from one of them that said she sent it to her distribution list, which is almost 500 people. So I know the information went out. We sent it to the school district. We asked the school district to be able to distribute it, whether it was to coaches or to teachers or however they could administer it. So I know the information did go out. Again, the hard part for us is to be able to get people to complete it and to be able to go in and take the time. What typically happens is people that have a vested interest and a specific interest are going to want to be able to go in and share what they want to say. And that's the reason why, again, that's sort of a part of the recommendation piece. We know that going in.
Did you guys collect demographic information on the participants in
We
your
do.
survey?
We do.
Okay, so you know by
Yep.
age and by, kids
Yep.
in school and all that kind of stuff, so
Yep.
that will help you break it down.
Yep.
Okay.
You said that there was some feeling that the facilities were deficient. Which facilities are you referring to?
The community center is where we program about 90%, I'd say, of what we do. So for those of you that are familiar with the community center, the recreation portion of it is is basically the east side of that complex. So within there we have a gymnasium, a single gymnasium, we have a conference room, a community room, which is the old kitchen from that building, and then a senior lounge. Those are what we call our program areas. There is still a working kitchen in that facility that we use for some of our programs, but we don't really consider that as program space. So that facility is where we host, or obviously house, most of our internal programs. The good news is because we have a relationship with the school district and we're able to get into the school, we can use gym space or program space in the schools when our program or our facility doesn't meet our programming. An example is right now we're running a program on Saturdays at Big Trail because it's got 130 kids in it. We can't house that number of kids in our own facility. So we have to move over to and use that facility. We've got a great relationship with the school district and that we're the second choice in regards to for program space. So after they designate their practice or game or whatever it might be space, we get first choice after that. So at least we do get some, I'll say, better time. We don't get the time obviously we'd like. There's still programs that we're not able to offer because we just can't get into space. If it's a youth program and we can't get into a school or we can't get into a gymnasium until 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, sort of limits us to the type of program or who we can program for in those situations. So from a program space, really the community center is from a lack of size standpoint. That's really where we're at this point.
Are you envisioning replacing it, expanding it, modifying it?
I'd say any of those are on the table. Those are the things that the town obviously will have to address as we move forward is what's the best option. Is it expanding? The issue that we have at the community center, for those of you who know, one, we're tied to the library. The second piece is we also own no land around us. So all the facilities or all the amenities outside of the community center, from ball fields, space like that, that's all part of the school district. So we don't have any place that we really can expand to. The other concern that I have in regards to the community center is from a facility standpoint, that's okay. It'd be the northwest corner. That's the court section of the building. So that's where our courts are located. The front of the building is the library. That green space that's in between there, in between the library or between the courts and the rec office is what we designate as our courtyard. That's actually green space for programming. We use that during the summer for summer camp. It's not a good environment to have our rec center and our courts in the same facility. It's just not a good mix. Some of the things that you see come and go out of the court building on a daily basis leaves a little bit to be desired, and having that intermixed with with youth programs especially, is a little bit concerning during certain times of year, so. There you go.
Has there been any consideration to moving the courts somewhere else and taking over that space? If you did that, would that meet your needs? Or is it something that, the state police are in there too, so it's not just that simple.
Correct.
If, in a hypothetical world, if they weren't in there, would that make
Obviously.
that adequate?
I would say it would help with the problem. I don't want to say it would solve the problem, because there's still issues that we have, and I can go over some of the program numbers for you now. Am I right on your time, or do you want me to?
Yeah.
You're doing great.
All you.
Just,
Can you pull those up, Chris?
sure, one thing. So to answer the question in regards to, the amount of space, while any space would be an improvement over to what we currently have, from a rough square footage standpoint, our gymnasium's about 3,600 square feet. I want to say our community room's around 1,900 square feet. Those are our two big program space. So we're really programming on the rec side for just under 10,000 square feet of space. So that's not a lot of program space. If you picked up a court side where you do have, two large rooms, you could pick up some flexibility and some program flexibility, but trying to program where we are now has just become a bit of a challenge. And,
Which one are you starting with?
I'll start just with the enrollment.
With rec track?
Yeah. So what we do on an annual basis is we do collect registration numbers through what we call our rec track enrollment system. So anybody who registers with us, it goes into our system. This report is what we provide. I provide to the town board. I apologize, Rob, you're going to hear this again. I do this on an annual basis just so people have an idea of where we stand in regards to our annual report or enrollment. It goes back to 2014 up until this past year, obviously 2018. The number of programs is broken down by our seasons, winter and spring, which we classify as one season, and then our summer and our fall. Obviously, our summer is our biggest session because of just the programs that we provide. So you can see,
Question.
yep,
Are we currently at a point where we're having to turn people away from programs because we can't support the number of people that want to?
there are a number of programs that, yes, it depends on
So
what,
where is that? Is that generally in like some of the youth sports things? Is that, where is that in terms of what type of program?
from a turning away for enrollment, generally no, because
And again, I'm kind of sensitive to some of the comments that you've made about you having to go to other towns to get your kids in sports programs.
Correct.
So
Which we continue to.
I'm trying to understand that, are we actively at the point now where we just don't have enough things for the number of people that want to participate?
I'll put it this way for you, Harold. What we have now is what we've been trying to do now is program for the space that we have.
Okay.
We know that we can't take or run a program for 50 kids in an indoor soccer program.
Okay.
We don't have a facility to do
So
so.
you take the first 50,
We don't even run that program
Okay.
because we know we don't have the ability
Okay.
to run that. Now, a program like a basketball program or a youth basketball program where we know we have some flexibility to go into one of the gymnasiums, we've been able to do that. We don't do it in our own program, our facility. We utilize the schools for that. We have 135 kids that are participating right now on Saturdays for that. So certain programs, yes, there is definitely I'll say a correlation to the activity, whether it's sports or gym related, that is a concern. The other issue that you can sort of draw a little bit further is, I'll use an example like pickleball. We run pickleball right now in our gymnasium. We have a single court in that gym, so we have one court for pickleball. Yesterday, there were 16 people that were sitting against the wall in their folding chairs waiting for their opportunity to play. We're able to provide it. We didn't have to turn people away, but it's not the most efficient and effective, and it ultimately has a bit of an impact.
Okay, I'll offer one other comment,
Mhm.
is I think you miss people that are part of the town of Penfield, but actually have a Webster mailing address. Because the post office brings us
Yeah.
the Webster recreation things, and it never brings me the Penfield ones.
We've had
And that's not the town's fault, I think that's the post office issue.
We've had a number of issues, actually, I just said that, because we've had a number of issues with our mailing of our brochure.
I'm sorry?
I said there's multiple zip codes within Penfield.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's actually
There's a ton,
challenging, yeah.
and actually, we have a meeting set up for later this month with the postmaster to go over a
Because, I mean,
couple
I'll
of
be
our
honest, I signed up and
concerns.
gone to some Webster ones just because that arrived in the mail. My wife and I looked at it and said, hey, that'd be fun. We went and signed up and actually participated before I realized what we had done.
Did you receive Webster Rec, or did you receive, because I don't believe that they actually mail there, so, or did you
It's
receive
in
like
a
continuing?
flyer
mail?
that arrived in the mail, and it was from Webster.
Okay.
I actually signed up and went and did something in theirs,
Good.
without knowing that I had done something.
Well, like I said, it's a challenge. We have other issues that we have with
Okay.
the delivery of that we're hoping to address
Okay.
in regards to the timing of it.
So one last question on that. Do you have a sense for how many programs we have more people that want to participate in than we're able to support?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you.
And is it mostly in the youth area or?
Actually, to be honest with you, if I had to say right now, if I had to venture, I would say from a turning away standpoint, it would be more in the senior program.
Okay.
And the reason is because that's an education, that's an education type of a class where it's limited in space. And because in the facility that we have, we really only have one, I'll say, larger room for that, being the community room. But again, I gotta be careful how I say that, because we don't offer programs because we know we don't have the
Okay,
space
and
or
that makes sense.
accommodation.
Right.
So, if you look at our registration system, we can print off how many classes we actually had to cancel or close off because we had a wait list.
Mhm.
We can do that. That doesn't always tell what I'll say is a true story, because we've become very good at adapting to what we have
Okay.
in front of us.
Okay.
So that number's skewed, obviously.
Correct.
I mean, obviously, some of these programs that you're doing offer, residents are going to other townships,
That's
like
correct.
Webster and Barrington,
That's correct.
because they offer different programs that
And they have more space to be able to
they
do
have
it.
the space and the field space and everything else that goes along with it.
That's correct. If you look at what we did, again, to go back, when we did the prior master plan back in 2012, again, the focus was on program development. And since then, sort of how that has changed, in 2014, which was a year after we adopted that master plan in 2012, there was 842 different programs that were offered or put into our registration system. That number's jumped up to, over 1,100 now. Areas where we've seen increase is in that senior population in our DEER programs, the number of programs that are offered. But again, that's because we have the most flexibility in that building during the hours of, 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock. So we have that flexibility, and we have a great DEER program that has really sort of expanded our program offerings.
Helping with deer?
I'm sorry, see, again, this is where I talk like I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. DEER actually stands for Daytime Education at Recreation. So it's, rather than call it a senior program or a 55-plus program, it's a little bit more of a active name. So it's Daytime Education at Recreation. It can be anything from an educational class to lecture series to truthfully a knitting class. So what I'll say is that what we do in Penfield now from that population is unique compared to any of the other towns you do look around. If you look at what Webster provides in that category, or Pittsford or Victor or any of the other communities on this side, you'll see that what we have from that population is very unique, and that's why I think from a program space, that's one that we've seen that we just can't even accommodate on our own. Our Thursday lecture series right now, which is when our big DEER day is, where we bring in guest lecturers, we have to utilize space that's actually controlled by the library. It's not even our own space, because we don't have enough space in the community room to be able to house it. So we have to utilize the space through the library. And that's, again, dependent on whether or not the library's got a program going, and if they do, then we need to alter our schedule around that. So, again, it's a tough thing for me to be able to explain, because we do it on a daily basis in regards to management of that facility with the programs. But as I shared with the town board earlier, to have 1,154 programs, and that's programs with registrations, that doesn't take into account any of the programs that what we would consider free events that we manage. So any of the programs that are, just drop-in kind of programs, things like pickleball or open play for little people, doesn't even take into account those kind of things. That's 1,154 programs with just over almost 12,500 registrations that have gone through that system. So that's something that I can't stress enough of how well our staff actually manages the roughly 10,000 square feet that they have to program.
Yeah, of the towns in Monroe County, I've got money with no object. Which town has a facility that you think would be something similar to what we would require?
That's a good question.
I mean, 'cause I bet, well, you mentioned Webster. I've been to Webster. Let's
I
start
bet
there.
the parents in Barrington.
Parents, what parents in that? Yeah, I
Parents
mean,
is
let's, I guess, start with those two. I mean, is that what you're envisioning, or is it something different, something somewhere else?
One of the unique things I think about from a program space as we look to the future, look forward, is it's got to be what I'll say more multifaceted. Because the one thing that we find that we're able to do is be able to use program space for many different programs. Doesn't need to strictly be, if it's a classroom, it has to be a classroom type of a setting. It can be used for meetings, or it can be used for lectures, it can be used for an arts and crafts class. So I tend to lean more on the multi-purpose side versus specific space. Obviously, there's a gym shortage that we have in this community. It's no question if you drive to any one of the elementary schools in the evening between PYB or our Little Patriots basketball program, gyms are being used by various sports teams. And that's just not even taking into account some of the programs that are being done in the community that are looking for program space. So, I'd say from what's an ideal situation or a facility, I don't know that there's one in the area that I would say that's it. I think they all have their pros and cons. There's things about parenting that I really like, and there's things that I don't necessarily like. I think the more multi-purpose oriented it is, the more beneficial it would be for our department in the types of programs then we could provide. But there are amenities or features I think that are, what I'll say, necessary. Things like gym space, walking track, even if that's nothing more than just around the gymnasium, something like you see at Webster, where it's dedicated walking space for. So there's features that I'd say are important, not any that I'd say are, hard, fast, that you have to have. There's features that I don't know necessarily that we'd have to have. An aquatic center like you see at Parrington, I don't see as being that valuable. We currently have an arrangement with the school district where, we offer our aquatic programs through that pool. So we've got that feature already, and it's nothing that we have to, keep under our house or maintain.
It's also important to remember that Parrington's community center wasn't built
Yeah.
by town residents,
Right.
tax dollars. That was built by Waste Management.
Yep. And Webster had a nice start to their facility because it was an old, Xerox Recreation Association facility. So, there was already an existing gymnasium and there was a fitness center in there. So they already had sort of a blueprint to work with. So, they were able to just take that facility and just expand on it with some renovation. Because actually their gymnasium is original gymnasium. I don't want to date myself, but I was there when that was actually open.
Do any of the lodges, like the Dolomite right next door, get utilized as overflow space or supplemental space?
It's a great question. We do. We used to not do that as often as we do now, but part of the reason that we are doing it now is because of that 1,154. For us to be able to do it, we are utilizing Dolomite and Harris Whalen for a number of different programs. I don't want to say we're utilizing it daily or weekly, but we do utilize it on a regular basis. Obviously, we try to avoid any kind of a Friday night or a weekend program in either of those facilities, just because of the amount of usage that those lodges receive from our residents. We don't want to tie it up with programs, so we try to utilize those when that situation, like on a Monday through a Thursday situation.
Also, so I've been in the town a few years now, I've come to think of the East Side Y as kind of an unofficial supplemental Penfield Community Center. Is there any formal relationship between the Y and the town? If so, can you speak to it? If not, can that be explored as a temporary solution until a new facility is built?
We've had what I'll say is informal discussions, actually. When that facility was built, there was a number of times that we did meet with them to discuss the types of programs that they were going to be providing as opposed to what we're doing. That's part of the reason why we've tried to stay away from similar type programs, knowing that if they're able to manage that under their roof, and it's something that we're not able to do so under our roof, allow Eastside Y just to go ahead and take the ball. Now, that doesn't mean that that's something that we would like to continue. Obviously, we hear from a number of people that the YMCA is a beautiful facility, but it's also a membership-based facility where our programs are not. So if you live in Penfield and you want to participate, it's not going to cost you any different than what you're currently paying with your taxes. So that's the one piece that we do here on a regular basis. We have done what I'll say some programming or partnering with the YMCA. For a few years, we were actually partnered with them and we ran our 5K together. I tried to be able to coordinate that. And we were looking at programs. There were a few programs, again, that we identified things, even special events, things such as the Easter egg hunt, that we just said, you know what, they can manage that since that's something that they have a larger ability to be able to provide. So we allowed that sort of process to work its way through. But I think as you look at what we do, we try to provide as many services as we can to everybody in the community, and that's really sort of where we've had our attention, especially in the last 4 or 5 years.
Do you still have some joint programs with Penfield Racket Club?
Mhm.
So-
We have a number of, and even if you look through our brochure, you'll see, between Penfield Fitness Racket Club, Gymnastics Training Center, Eagle Vale, we have a number of different, partners that we try to be able to still provide programs through. And that's not to say a facility would change that. Obviously, if you built a facility with a gymnasium and some classrooms, you're still going to work with Eagle Vale to be able to provide golf lessons, as an example. So we'll continue to do that, obviously.
We have mapping here of what the Town Hall, Veterans Park area, how much open space there actually still might be here.
I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but we do have actually CAD files showing
What I'm
the
getting
number
at
of
is-
ball fields and.
It sounds like what we're going through here in Penfield too, in part, is not just upgrading existing facilities to meet need, but also there seems to be a lacking of town center, so to speak, that a lot of communities are now rethinking and redeveloping with that in mind, like a new rec center right nearby, if space allows, a new library. And it sounds like there is this disjointed part of the town here, where you got the rec center, the library, the courts, all over on here road,
Right.
as opposed to more
Obviously,
consolidated.
having a one-stop shop, so to speak, would be ideal, to be able to have that kind of a facility. When the building was renovated for rec space, I think it was in 1985. I don't know
And
when.
you got stage in there too,
Yep.
for community
Yep.
players too.
Now,
as well.
whether that was going to be long-term or,
But I mean, to be more of a sense of center as far as a master plan goes. Because I'm going through this now where I work, as a for instance.
I think that's a great discussion as we get into it, as we kind of get through our education for this group to talk about. Is
And another, where
some
at one point-
overall long-term goals is to, relocate if we're gonna have a community center here, a recreation facility, would that make sense? Where, the DPW, and as we said, we'll have other groups come in, the DPW is kind of outgrowing what their facility is, and they're looking at right now is, do they rebuild, do they move, how do they grow? Obviously, as the town continues to expand and grow, they've got to have more plow trucks and they have to provide more services on their end. So that's some of the stuff that, as this group can weigh in on.
Where I work, down in Henrietta, secret is that we just built a new rec center, and now we're in the process of building a new library, and possibility of moving the courts into the old library, and but the whole purpose was more to develop, as a sense of self, a town center, in effect.
And that's something that,
That-
I think that's a good
this
discussion for this
committee
group to look at in the long run,
address
to
it.
come up with
Mhm.
a long-term plan as we continue to grow. This is the geographic center of the town, is right here. Obviously, that was chosen for a reason. As it continues to grow, this is the middle of the town, is where development is right now. Most of the development's kind of west and, more centralized that way, but as the town continues to grow or the future goes on, this is kind of the geographic center, so that's be a good discussion. So I say we had, Kristen tonight is kind of that first guest to kind of talk about that. We can have other departments come in and kind of talk about their wants and needs for the future and see what they have, and then kind of start to look at long-term goals as we're planning or master planning. As Zach pulled up, we've acquired pieces of property around us as we can. We're a little bit limited. We kind of have a creek that cuts through, that kind of cuts off a little bit too far in the back with wetlands and everything else. But we have acquired other parcels as they've come up. That's kind of been some strategic planning from the board and from the town as land comes up or is available, let's acquire it, and then at least you've got opportunities to expand and to reassess.
Yeah, just to tie on to that, so it really is a question of capacity. So if you take a look at what's going on with the courts and the library and that current facility, are they at capacity? What's their capacity look like? So when you start making suggestions, maybe we move those to another facility, and then that'd be interesting to talk to them to find out what their capacity is.
That makes sense from a
Yeah.
green space perspective.
No, it agreed, but I'm saying that to even have the discussion, if they're not at capacity and we are, or we are all at capacity, then maybe it makes more sense that building gets increased for the courts, and we talk about, long-term planning
And then
for
some of the
recreation.
logistics, I
Yeah,
think the library would love to expand, and I'm sure they're continuing to grow. The
Right.
courts, they've done some redevelopment, reconfiguration in their piece, but I'm sure if you pulled one part out, the others could grow internally.
And there was another sheriff, there's another center.
There's
another
there's a
state
state
trooper.
trooper.
So again, those are all folks that are leveraging that facility,
We just don't have any more land over there. Physically, the limits of the parking lot is pretty much the limits of
Yeah,
what
so
the
that's
town
why I'm
owns.
saying that from a recreation standpoint, I'm going out on a limb here, but it doesn't make as much sense to expand recreation in that building. It makes more sense to maybe expand the other
Right.
facilities that are in there, and recreation can start with the green space they need.
I call the court functional, but not, certainly not. You go in there some days and it's packed to the gills, especially on a traffic day.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's a whole other courtroom that they almost never go in.
And that's
It's-
it's actually an interesting point, because we used to utilize, again, to go back to the shared space, we used to utilize that first courtroom, but we started to have some issues with, again, I'll say cross-contamination with people coming in and the clientele that was in there, and it was requested that we limit the type of programs that we provide in
So
there.
people showing up for knitting class didn't necessarily want to go to the metal detector, that's what I'm saying.
So it just became, it became
So really, they're my
Right, might need to be checked.
So rather than sort of go through and go, okay, this one qualifies, this one doesn't, we just said it's in the best interest of all the program participants if we just don't use that court space. So unfortunately, there is a courtroom that does sit there unused for.
But at the
large
same
percentage of
time, you've got both the judges have to share an office.
Mhm.
And the office is probably about
A little bigger than that.
bigger than this space here with the tables.
So again, it's the way the space is allocated and set up versus the actual available square
When
footage,
we did-
sounds like.
We did a facility update back in 2007, and I think that was one of the comments in there was, the building was built in 1953 as an elementary school. It was never designed to be a community center.
Yep.
There's not a focal center entrance where people go in and they're directed. I can't tell you how many people, and you probably know this, how many people come into our office ready to pay a speeding ticket. We're like, nope, you gotta go down the sidewalk or out the hall.
Or around the building entirely.
So it's never was designed as such. And, as things expand, it becomes more and more evident that, those pieces don't always necessarily.
So, one thing that we didn't really touch on in this meeting that I know you addressed with the Shadow Pines Committee, that might be nice for people to hear is what you learned from the survey about what uses people would like to make of the green space in the town, now that we're talking about green space, of the more natural areas in the town. What recreational uses were kind of in the top, 3 for people, for things like that?
Hiking and what I'll say, walking were near the top. And I believe when I gave that presentation to the Shadow Pines group, I believe those were 2 that I identified. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I'd be more than happy to send them to you, the full list of what those and how they broke out. But those were, what I'll say, non-facility driven type of activities or programs that are in parks or in green space, such as hiking, biking, walking, cross-country skiing, those kind of.
So is there sort of a partnership between the Recreation Committee and the Trails Committee
Yeah.
to
The Trails Committee
facilitate those
actually,
sorts of things?
the Trails Committee actually falls under the umbrella of the Rec Department. One of our assistant directors, actually, she serves on the committee, so she attends the monthly meetings. We're the ones that publicize and promote their trails and their events, so it actually does fall, obviously, within our guys.
You know, the tiny to Shadow Pines too, did you have a chance to do the walk to the back part of Shadow Pines?
I have here.
There were 4 or 5 of us that walked through there, and my immediate thought was, this is, for all those activities you talked about.
Heaven.
It's heaven, yeah. It's, the trails are already there, there's very little work that would have to be done in order to, from a recreation standpoint, you must have looked at that when it first happened and went,
It is a
Yeah.
very nice piece of property. It has a ton of potential for it.
yep.
Chris, did the survey cover anything as far as lodges? I know we've talked about it internally and stuff, and just the demand on lodges. I know we have 2 kind of enclosed all-season lodges and everything else.
It did not, Mark. And I think part of it is because we know the stress that we currently have in regards to lodges. If there's one thing that we do know from a facility space that people are clamoring for, it's additional indoor enclosed lodge facility. As I've shared with the staff here before, and even town board in previous sessions, is when we have lodge reservation for the next year, so we did that on December 5th. We started collecting reservations for 2019. When we started it at 10 o'clock, by 11 o'clock, there wasn't a weekend that you could rent Dolomite or Harris Whalen Lodge between April and October. So within an hour, both those lodges were booked. So it's obviously a demand, and there's obviously an interest. I can't tell you that 95% of that or 100% of that is Penfield residents. Obviously, for that first day, we don't have any way for us to be able to designate non and residents, so it's just open. So there is a percentage, but I will say that it's probably close to 80% are paying a resident rate. So whether they're the ones that's actually having the party or they're just doing the booking, that's actually how it sort of looks out. So there is a definite need that the town's going to have to address, and I think you're going to see that come in from the park side of the master plan as part of their recommendation is to address and look at, that there needs to be another lodge of some type. Does it need to be a Dolomite type of a lodge? No. Can it be a Harris Whalen? Absolutely. We're from an amenity standpoint, but just something to relieve, again, some of that pressure that those 2 buildings are feeling over the course of the year.
Chris, what's the frequency of use of those lodges, like on a week-to-week basis, excluding out the weekends during the week?
Not real busy. I will say Dolomite much more so than what Harris Whalen. Harris Whalen, very rarely do we get a Tuesday during the day, especially for what I'd say a business meeting or any kind of a more of a work function. Dolomite does get quite a few throughout the year. Where
Do you use Dolomite and Harris Whalen for your summer programs?
we've used Harris Whalen in the past, we've never used Dolomite. We have used Dolomite for what I call offshoot camps, things like Science and Nature Camp, where it's a 1 or 2 week camp rather than the whole summer. They'll utilize it. We used to use Harris Whalen as a site for our summer camp, but actually what we've done last year, we scaled back our program rather than spreading ourselves between 3 different sites, the Community Center, Harris Whalen, and Scribner. What we did is we just absorbed those kids that were at Harris Whalen into our community center, so we closed that off. So now we're looking to do some of those offshoot camps this summer through it. again, not the entire length of summer, but, 1 or 2 week type programs.
Can those facilities be used for any of the other, recreation programs?
That's what I was saying earlier, is we do try to, if there's a, I think we had an arts and crafts class, an adult arts and crafts class, and I don't want to say what it was because I'm not 100% sure, but it was an adults arts and crafts, and we've wanted to offer a different section for it, but we didn't have enough space. It was typically offered, I think, on a Wednesday night, and the instructor wanted to offer a program on Tuesday night. We didn't have space in the community center, so she took her program over to Harris Wayland, and she ran her program out of Harris Wayland.
Any other questions for Chris? Chris, is there anything else that, any other facility wants, needs? Obviously, we'll keep in touch and update the group as we go along.
Sure.
You're kind of our first special guest, but it's kind of timely you just talked to the Shadow Pines Committee, and you're kind of working through your master plan now, so we thought it was kind of timely to bring you in now. We can bring in other departments, we can bring in other groups, as we've said, of experts or in their piece to kind of share and provide their thoughts and impact, but appreciate you coming in tonight and sharing your time. And
Appreciate listening, and again, like I said, it's always hard for me to, make sure everybody understands, because it's what I do on a daily basis, and, if there's questions that you do have, even after you leave here tonight, feel free to reach out to me, I'm located in the office, my number's all over the website, just call the main line and they'll get it.
So, Chris, I want to thank you for coming in, and just briefly, maybe for Jim, Mark, Zach, as we sort of continue to move forward, one of the things that I think may be helpful for this committee, just to get a sense of where Penfield ranks amongst its peers or other communities in Monroe County at least, is maybe over the next few weeks, kind of putting together some just basic schematics of total square footage of rec space compared to neighboring towns, total square footage of DPW space, total square footage of town space, total square footage of courts. I can tell you from a court standpoint, nothing says we have to have a standalone court. It could be in this room, it could be in another town facility. The key issue there is safety. You have to make sure the court is safe. And also, you can't have it in here on a Tuesday or a Thursday or a Wednesday night when there's other uses in the building. So that's part of the thing, but you go to courts all throughout New York State, they could be in the DPW garage, they could be in the town hall. So there's nothing that says that that space has to be dedicated for all time to a court. So I think just moving forward, kind of giving the committee a sense of square footage, where it ranks, maybe where we're really lacking, maybe where we're on par, maybe where we're ahead of some of the other towns. And then also, we didn't really dive into it tonight. I think the Parks Master Plan is trying to provide this information, but sort of acreage, usage, field usage, sort of when they can be used and when they can't be used, and how quickly or how often they have to be rotated. And if we have a wet spring, what that really does to the entire program. Not only town programs, but every youth organization in Monroe County that's now out of space. So I think that's just good, appendix type information that they can digest as they continue to work on the various aspects of the plan. So just wanted to put that as an action item out there for you guys.
Great. Any last things for Chris before we let him go home and rest his voice? Well, again, Chris, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you spending the time with the group and giving input. I say we'll have some others to come in and share updates with that. So I'll let you go home.
All right, I want to thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we were going to jump into natural resources. Some of the stuff we've covered before, we're back in education. I'll try to kind of keep it quick. I know some of the stuff kind of gets boring as we kind of go through education, so wave at me if I get going too fast or something. We've talked about e-pods before, we've talked about some of the other stuff before, so I'll try to kind of move more quickly through it. We've got several sections kind of left to go through, and then we can come back to scheduling people to come in and start looking at properties, and obviously we want to let you guys loose on starting to do some of these master planning things and look at different areas. Yep, so Zach's pulling up the section. Natural resources kind of starts off, and some of the tasks from last time was pursue green technologies, energy conservation techniques, minimize communities' environmental footprint. So our town, after Supervisor LaFountain started, he started the EEAC committee, that's our Energy and Environmental Advisory Committee, looking at those very things. That's kind of very near and dear to his heart, is to look at the environment and to be aware of that. So as through that, out of that group, we've had some rain barrel workshops. We've worked on reduction of our fleet size. We've done electric car charging stations. We have solar power for a pump station, which was first of its kind in the area. If anybody's gone down Jackson Road recently, we have a 4-acre solar farm that is 2/3 of it, at least has the panels on it now. I think that's a February timeframe to get that turned on. That'll power 75% of our facilities, not the entire town of Penfield, but recreation building, town of Penfield, town hall, and DPW. When I say Penfield, people look at me a little funny, but
Free power.
so, you know, we've looked at those things. We've looked at environmental. Some of the recommendations was to look at a community garden, which we have over on 5 Mile Line Road. We've installed rain gardens behind the sewer facility building. And then it even gets into, we've purchased our street lighting, so to another control cost. Other communities are looking at doing that. Before, we used to pay a flat rate usage to RG&E for that utility. We now buy our own poles, and we're in the process of converting over our lights from high-pressure sodium metal halide to more energy-efficient LEDs. So as time goes on, you'll see those change over on that end. So that kind of goes through the investigation of a town sustainability policy. That's something we're currently looking at now. We've shared it with our EEAC group initially. That's something we've even talked about, or I kind of put out there, is that something either we want to incorporate into our next update. You know, currently we do allow solar within the town. Besides our regional facility and what the county's done, we don't have any, I say regional solar facilities. People have done individual ones in their backyard or on the roof. We have very minimal wind. We have a couple of wind units with that, but that's something put out there. We've had a couple of opportunities. People have done geothermal on their property, but we want to obviously support that and, you know, look at supporting that green movement moving forward. Whether people want to do green roof or, obviously we move along with a lot of the stuff the DEC has. You have to do green infrastructure with new developments and stormwater treatment and kind of on that clean water side of things. Revised zoning ordinance, incentive zoning for development, sustainable site plan building practices. Some of that rolls into what we've done with mixed use. That also rolls into Town Law 278, which is cluster development. So trying to minimize the size or impact of a footprint of development, preserving open space areas, preserving trees and green space. Educating staff on methods. Obviously, staff continues with ongoing training on our own end, and incorporate green initiatives in town facilities and development and maintenance. We've had this building evaluated as well as our highway department. This building has an automated system, automated lights on and off, power management for shutting heat off at nights and weekends. Same thing with the DPW. They've replaced all their lights over there to go green and be more energy efficient with that.
So, Mark, there's a lot of information you're providing quickly over this.
Yep.
Are all these written down somewhere where we can consume it at a more detailed pace?
Yes, and please wave at me out and slow down and go
Well, no,
slower.
I don't necessarily need to slow
Put it
down.
as a
If you can just say, here's a reference guide to the material we just provided, then I can read
If
it.
you go into the EEAC site so if you go under committees on our webpage, Energy and Environmental Advisory Committee, we have kind of a timeline of what that group has done and some of the things that have rolled out from that. So it kind of has some of the milestones we've gone through. That committee has looked at, and there's different groups out there. We've looked at climate smart communities. We've looked at, there's CCA, there's a couple other groups and initiatives out there that committee is currently looking at. The town has not jumped in on climate smart communities as of yet. We're following along. It's kind of like LEED certification. If anybody's done anything with LEED certified buildings, you can do all the stuff that goes into a LEED building, but you pay a whole lot of money and do a whole lot of paperwork to get the plaque that goes on the wall, but you can kind of do the same things without having to pay to get the shiny plaque. So that's kind of the approach. If you scroll down, I think there's meeting schedules, and then I think there's some summaries of timelines and stuff that's, oh yeah, the timeline, I think you run it, sorry.
Okay.
You had it. I'm reading this quickly. So we've kind of followed along. Some of what we've heard in other communities is that, you know, there's real money that goes into it to join up and to be part of it. And then the finish line kind of keeps moving. We'd rather kind of do our own stuff and kind of we follow what they do. We've had car charging stations. This was the first public car charging station in Monroe County. We have 3 now. We're looking at, you know, continuing to do more. We're looking at whether we get an electric vehicle as a town vehicle. We've done eco vehicles currently. You know, we continue to look at, you know, streamlining, you know, as much as you can a plow vehicle and everything else. You know,
And looking
work
at
on
future
that.
development as being required to have charging facilities.
And we've worked
as part of that
with
process.
developers, Baytown Plaza, we've worked with them to, you know, provide the conduit, you know, so they have abilities to put in car charging stations as part of their new development. So that's kind of a segue between that EEAC committee and the planning board and town board to kind of, you know, infiltrate through there. But this kind of shows some of those, the timelines of some of the stuff that's done, even, you know, computerizing the salt that's delivered off the back of the truck. You know, before it was just kind of an adjustment set. Now it's all computerized, so it's based on the speed you're driving, how much salt it drops, you know, so to minimize the environmental impact of that. But that section under EEAC has a lot of that information, and I can provide you more if you're looking for that. I think the next section that kind of gets into reduce, reuse, recycle. Obviously, we all have recycle bins here at the town facilities. We've put recycling totes at parks and especially park events for cans, bottles, and everything else. We do collection, we do spring drop-off, fall drop-off, spring cleanup. Everybody's aware of Eco Park. Everybody's used Eco Park. We obviously try to promote that, have flyers for that. If anybody doesn't know about Eco Park, it's a county-run facility that works in collaboration with the town. You can drop off electronics, you can recycle just about everything but wood. They'll take styrofoam. I don't think they take sneakers anymore, but they used to take sneakers, and they'd take the rubber off the bottom of the sneakers and recycle them into new tennis courts. But they'll take, you know, needles, they'll take batteries, they'll take metals, plastics.
Tube TVs.
Tube TVs. People are looking to get rid of humidifiers, refrigerators. You know, you can take it there and they'll, you know, recycle it properly. So that's it. Avian Drive, the south end of the airport.
It's a great facility.
I think they're open Wednesdays and Saturdays.
Tube TV laying in front of her house for like 6 months. Yeah, I might drop a flyer off at her house.
I've gone by and put a little sticky note with a little flyer on it
If you
before.
drive down Old Browncroft and you get off of there, going back to the neighborhood, you can't miss it. That TV is
I'll have to drive by, but I have
sitting
taped little
there,
flyers
sitting
to
there for
before.
months.
Yes.
Probably weighs 120 pounds too.
It's
Yeah.
illegal
Well,
for
I-
your waste hauler to take it now, so
Well,
they
yeah,
can't
'cause
take it.
I actually called Waste Management when I
They
first
won't
moved
take it.
here, and at that time they were taking it, so I got the special pickup and everything, and the guy came, right? Opened up my garbage can, threw the TV in the garbage can, and I'm like, okay. And I paid $15. I said, I could have picked the damn
could've
thing up
done
and
that
thrown it in the
for
garbage
Yeah.
can.
Jeez. Quick question, Mark. I was 2 places recently, and they do compost collection. And they have special little bins that you put out, you know, for vegetable and, you know, fruits and, you know, whatever, that sort of stuff. Is there any thought of doing that in Penfield?
We haven't as of yet. I think that would kind of roll in with leaf pickup, but that could be in a greater master plan. I mean, if DPW was to move and had a bigger facility, they just don't have the land back there to
I think
handle
the
it.
big thing is we're encouraging individual composting. We have some criteria for that on site. We have several people that have set up facilities like that on their own property, and they call us periodically just to make sure they're doing the right thing.
Oh, yeah, we have a huge composting.
Yeah, a lot of
room.
people are doing that now.
We
It's worked out
compost
well.
too.
I mean, we've looked at leaf pickup. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
50-50
Yeah,
divisive
yeah.
line. I don't want to get into that one
Please
too
don't.
much, but you know, we take mulch, or excuse me, we take wood and brush and then provide the mulch back. You know, that's always over here on this property. I know some other communities that have bigger properties take leaves, or at least allow for leaf drop-off. We just don't physically have the space over there between materials they need for construction in the summertime stone for oil and stone, everything else, that back lot is kind of full right now, so that's,
No, I was in Canada and I was in Brooklyn, and both places, surprisingly, very opposite communities where everybody had these little
food.
compost bins
Dispenser.
out, just looked like a small garbage can, and they had these little bins that they were given to keep in the kitchen that were pretty odor-free and stuff, so just thought,
You're
Figured I'll
composting
ask.
in our office, aren't you?
For a while.
He's got his
they
own composting facility.
Got some water bottles that might be.
Okay, so, see,
yeah.
We recycled that one.
And then down to number 4, asphalt millings. Anytime we mill roads, those are a hot commodity. We use them for our own, but we also have requests for people to use them. You can put them back down, and we've used them at LaSalle's Landing Park. We've used them for, other park areas. A lot of our trails are mulch. We work with the Trails Committee that drop mulch off, and then they can spread it around. But asphalt millings, we try not to. That's a commodity. It's not a waste product anymore.
No.
To utilize those. Steep slopes and woodlands. This gets into the EPODs, which are Environmental Protection Overlay Districts. Those were formed in 1981. We've talked a lot about EPODs, but that's protecting our steep slopes. That's protecting wetlands, woodlands, water courses, and floodplains are 5. Other than, and we'll get into some of the FEMA floodplain stuff in a minute, we were kind of ahead of some of the other stuff before DEC came along. We had PECR long before the state had SECR, so we were kind of ahead on some of the environmental pieces, looking at protecting wetlands and water courses. We've still got those out there. Any of our EPODs, none of them are prohibitions. They're all higher level of review and regulations. So we can't say, the eminent domain, if we did a taking of you can't develop on the steep slope at all. We try to discourage it, offer up other areas for development from it. That kind of covers the protected area, steep slopes and woodland section. Any question on item C?
So you said you can't tell people you can't build, you can just make requirements more stringent or discourage them?
Yes.
Or
We
you
try to
just-
discourage it with all the plans that come in. I mean, if you can avoid it, that's great, but there are engineering solutions that allow people to do work in these areas, usually with some sort of compensation or design that allows them to actually perform the work they're trying to do. And it's up to us to say, well, if we can mitigate that as small as possible, then we try to do that every time a project comes in.
I mean, even the most stringent is floodplains and wetlands. I mean, even, we always have this argument with developers all the time. I mean, you can buy wetland credits. Out in Henrietta, I believe they've got, or Scottsville, they've got an area that they created wetlands, and if you wanted to fill a wetland on your property, it's an astronomical cost, but you could go buy credits of you're buying wetlands somewhere else to compensate what you have.
We're not
So
big fans of that.
we don't propose it, we don't, try to support it, but it is an option out there. So even something as, try to say as sacred as wetlands, there are opportunities. If you had enough money, you can buy credits and say, I'm gonna go buy 2 acres in Henrietta, and that's my wetland, and I'm gonna fill this one.
Like carbon credits, basically. But there's no EPA oversight of these same natural
There is. I mean,
spaces?
EPA falls into, we have stormwater regulations on having ponds for new developments and green infrastructure. EPA falls under FEMA, so floodplain regulations, that's kind of the most stringent one.
Specialist.
It's very hard to build, almost impossible to build in a floodway, but in a floodplain, you can do compensating cuts and fills. So if you're working in the Panorama Valley, we've talked about that area before, that was built under today's current regulations, it wouldn't be allowed, you wouldn't be down there, but it exists. We've got businesses down there, and we've got to work with them all the time. They want to come in and they want to update, they want to revise. We've got, and we'll get into talking about some of the contaminated areas, but the carriage cleaners used to be in front of the, it's a Perkins Swim Facility, ESL's right there. That one sat empty for a long time. They've come back, they've had approvals for an office building, but they can't make the footprint of that building any bigger than what it is. Basically says, this is the amount you filled in the floodplain before. We will not allow you to fill in the floodplain any further than that. Here's the footprint you have to work within. They even have to floodproof, the doors and the windows. The auto zone down there has gaskets, and we've got to go down there with the fire marshal. Tops has them. They've got bladders that, if a flood comes up, we, contact them, they put the gaskets in the doors, can shut flood-proof doors to preserve the product inside, because it's built within a floodplain. If and when they want to level the building and start over, they're kind of held to that footprint. They can't say we want to continue to fill in that area unless they do compensating cuts and fills. Basically, you take an area that's outside the floodplain, you lower it down.
Create
So you
floodplain.
lower it, you create an acre of storage area here, you can then fill an area over here. But even our code says it's a 1 1/4 to 1 ratio. So you've got to create an acre and a quarter of compensating area for the 1 acre you want to fill. So again, same thing with wetlands. DEC is usually 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1. So if you want to fill an acre of wetland, you may have to create an 1.5 acres or 2 acres of wetland somewhere else. So those regulations kind of discourage people from doing those. But we always kind of say you can engineer and design anything, and if you got enough money, you can do something. It just becomes more regulated and stringent to do that.
Do we pass over when we talk about green technologies, I thought the next section was contaminated sites, do we pass over that?
I don't know if we skipped that, but I'm coming up to it.
All right.
It's on my list, so I think it may be down a little bit further. It's contaminated pieces, but so as we talk about wetlands and water courses, obviously we deal with the U.S. Army Corps, we deal with the DEC, back and forth. We deal with the Nature Conservancy. They've preserved a lot of land. They have 1,000-acre swamps. We work with all those groups. There's always a balance between preserving wetland and keeping drainage facilities open and clear. So every year we have to apply for permits to the DEC and Army Corps to clean the streams, to keep them open, make sure trees don't fall down and block them. But it's a fine balance that we work back and forth with them. We're not looking to create the Panama Canal through, and there's other towns that have gone in and just out drained every wetland that's in the area, and we've gotten fines. But we obviously want to keep those open and flowing. If you don't maintain your streams, they get blocked quickly, and then everybody starts to have flooding and drainage issues with that. So that's something ongoing.
You could talk a little bit about Runaway Creek, what you're trying to accomplish.
Helens Creek.
Helens Creek. Yep.
We can talk about Runaway Creek as well after you're done with that.
So, Runaway Creek, we've kind of done it in the past. If anybody's kind of been down to that lower end of Channing Philbrook Park, years ago we used to have that sand wall behind the Dodge dealership. Kids would climb up it. We used to have the slope fail. Every year it was cutting it. So we went in and worked with the DEC to put in weirs, so called bendway weirs within the stream. Basically you pile up rocks and kind of adjust them. It creates back eddy currents and kind of helps steer the stream around. So if you get a heavy flow, it's not going right into that bank, undercutting that slope, and then you've got that slope failure. We've had some similar issues in Helens Creek. Helens Creek kind of runs behind the manufactured homes off of Linden Avenue. It also backs up to Helens Creek Valley, Burroughs Hills, Wood down in there. Paychecks is kind of on that far end. We had a large slope failure, it's going to be 2 or 3 summers ago now. An entire hillside just came down overnight. Kind of called by a homeowner and said, we got a problem down here. The stream moved over about 40 feet that way into his yard. The whole hill just came down in one fell swoop. The trees came down, blocked it all. Called the DEC and said, okay, we got to get into the stream. And they said, well, can you do it by hand? Like, we've got 4-foot, 8-foot diameter trees in there. And they said, well, we'd rather you not go in the stream. And, so it was working back and forth with them that this was thousands of yards of soil that came down, not just, we had a tree fall over and can't you cut it up with a chainsaw. So working back and forth with them. But I've had meetings with the town board. We're looking at grant funding. We're looking at other things to go into Helens Creek to set up some of these weirs to manage that flow as it comes out of Brighton and area south. A lot of those older built-up communities, they don't have stormwater ponds. So every time it rains, it just hits their parking lots, shoots off. So that's a very flashy stream. You go back there, it's kind of a dry, trickly little stream. It looks all peaceful and quiet. And then you get a storm event, even down south of here. That water hits, flashes through there. We've had a lot of erosion in people's backyards. Obviously, we've lost some hills and slopes. The neighbors are obviously concerned about losing chunks of their backyard. You look at it, and each storm, they lose another couple of feet. Obviously that'd be a concern to any resident. So we're looking at getting some funding. We're into design plans now to submit to DEC of how do you get in there, where do you put the rocks. We've been stockpiling rocks because, heck, if we're going to buy them, we've got enough in this town, but we've been stockpiling rocks. As we have erosion projects, you can go in there and kind of stack them up and line them up for that. So kind of another effort we're looking at is going through Helens Creek, and it's kind of a larger project than what we've done on the Runaway Creek.
The one on Runaway Creek, that was an interesting project. That was actually generated by the Monroe County Health Department, their environmental science labs, who were working with us on a regular basis on erosion control along that creek. They identified that area that Mark referred to earlier as a source of approximately 50% of the sediment loading that was occurring in Arundecoid Bay every year. So that was a major improvement in order to mitigate some of the erosion that was occurring into the creek and then ultimately into the bay.
And that's what we're targeting as far as funding, is looking at, some of those EPA environmental grants. If one, we can keep the sediment out of it. Those are trout streams. You have salmon runs, so obviously you have habitat for fish and wildlife down in there, as well as sediment loading to the bay.
Mark, just a real quick question.
Yep.
That Helens Creek, that backs up to like Corbett's Glen, right? Where that
Yes, it
down?
comes right out of
Okay, on the backside.
It's
all
where
right.
Buttermilk Falls
Yeah, I
comes
was
out
trying
of.
to think where.
That,
Yeah, we're the downstream of Corbett's Glen.
Yes, well, spent a lot of time unfortunately in the manufactured homes with the ambulance.
And we've had a lot of,
Yeah, I was just trying to picture where.
yeah, it's kind of down the hill from them, and we had a slope failure. It was kind of the middle of the neighborhood of one of theirs.
Sounds it.
It doesn't look as impressive in pictures, but it's about 100 feet up, and the top of the hill from 100 feet up
The town did an amazing job cleaning that up.
came
When
down.
we walked back there,
Did it all by hand.
yeah. the last two-
Teaspoons. We had little spoons. We got in there and
Little shovel and bucket like
picked
that.
away at it.
couple donkeys. Everybody in the town.
It's like at the beach. You
Talk a little bit about what you did on the hotel. I mean, you're right on a steep slope, and how we did the grading away from the slope too.
Yeah, actually, you can, Zach's kind of pulled up.
Somebody's yard, just an amazing.
You can zoom into the weirs in the back. You can actually see the weirs from here. You're looking from Panorama down into Cheney and Philbrook Park. So you're kind of on that lower back end. This is the New Hampton Inn. You got Big Oak off to your right, but you can see the little weir fingers, these little pieces here in the stream that kind of helps. It creates a little back eddy. It creates habitat for fish. They like to sit in there. As the water comes around, it swirls around there, which actually helps to steer the rest of it around so it just doesn't come into that wall. So you can kind of see the rock grouping and stuff that was done in there.
And grading away from the slope to the hotel.
Yep. So I think that takes us through flooding, flood hazards.
Just out of curiosity, Mark, how much input does the town have with FEMA when they decide to change the flood?
0.
Okay.
Less than zero.
Same as the
They don't even bother asking,
right? We have no
You don't
say.
have any input that they come back and say they're redrawing the floodplain map, and you get any input into that at all?
No.
They just hand it to us and say, here you go.
Unless you wanna launch your own study to try and
Right,
prove it.
right.
Yeah, I mean, you've got
The
to,
only reason I ask is a number of years ago, they changed the floodplain where I live. And it took me 3 years to get them to accept my loan to get back out of the
Yes,
floodplain.
yes.
What the federal government is kind of nasty about it is that they insist upon you paying full flood insurance until you prove to them that you're not really in the floodplain.
That's right.
Right.
And then they send you a letter saying, oops, we're sorry, you're really not, but they never give you
Which
back.
can't
any
be
of it.
done.
No, they give you none of it back. I mean, flood insurance in a Class A floodplain is incredibly expensive.
well, and it took us years. If you look at the maps, there's actually a foot
Yeah.
difference between Arundecoid on the west side of the bay and Webster on the east side of the bay. Somewhere in the middle of the bay, it drops a foot.
Yeah,
I haven't found that spot yet. I've been out there in the bay a couple of times. I didn't see where that foot drop is, but even in their own mapping, it's
I
off.
paid for 3 years because you have a pipe in my side yard. It's underground. And I couldn't convince them that the pipe was a pipe. So I was just curious as to whether you have any input at all when they decide to redraw those.
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
And the latest they've done, and it only affects us just at the south end of Arundecoid Bay, they've done, especially with all the hurricanes and the wave action on the shore, they've come through and done a lot of updating on shoreline erosion. Obviously, the impact from the St. Lawrence and all the water issues in Greece and Webster had a couple years ago, they remapped that. Some areas at Edgemere Drive, they've changed the floodplain by 8 feet.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So people's houses, basically their roof is the only thing that's above the floodplain. So it's going to be interesting is if and when those people ever redevelop their house or do something else, it's going to look like the Carolinas. You're going to have houses on stilts in those areas that are elevated above and on pilings up and above that.
That's a good point. You see that in Webster on the spit area where the fire took place a couple of years ago with the policemen and the firemen.
So
All those houses have been redeveloped above the base flood elevation. Yeah.
It's just like a
Okay,
garage, it's a
But
ground floor.
as you've seen, flood insurance is very costly. We're gonna see as some of the, people, if you own your home outright or can pay cash for it, you don't have to get flood insurance.
Correct.
If you have a mortgage, all new banks require flood insurance for it, and then the cost is astronomical. So there's a big charge on us, and we get audited. FEMA comes out and they look at what we're doing, and obviously we get dinged if we're allowing things in the floodplain, or we're allowing things that are gonna impact the floodplain. So that's why we've implemented the increase of compensating cuts and fills. We're trying to better that, and we're trying to keep our drainage ways open and flowing. Because obviously, flooding, not only a major cost, but a major impact if and when you do get flooded or have impact from
And
it.
again, it's, as you were referring to earlier with the regulatory aspect of the EPODs, it's FEMA's way of saying to you, we're not going to take your right to develop your property, but you're going to pay a heavy price to do it. And we're not going to be impacted by it if you do it. Of course, they are impacted by it.
So number one, safeguard hazards. We've talked about regulations of floodplains and floodways. We've talked about FEMA and their kind of oversight of what we do. F, monitor, update EPOD regulations and data layers. We continue to go through that with the Conservation Board. We update woodlands that's eventually adopted by the town board. We go through and update steep slopes as we get better LiDAR data. That's the data that the county flew. We had 2-foot contours. We just got 1-foot contours, or in the process of getting the 1-foot contours, so we can update what steep slope is classified as. You can run a program and look at anything 15% or above. And then best management practices in development areas. We work with them to do cluster developments if we can stay away from those areas, preserve trees, protect steep slopes. George, as you were saying, updated inventory suspected confirmed waste disposal sites. We have a few in the town. We've worked on cleaning up several. Others are kind of off. We started with Carriage Cleaners. That site is an ongoing cleanup. That's down in Panorama. That's what kind of the pile of rubble is. When it was the Cleaners, there was some material that got down into the water system. It's heavier than water, so it keeps going down, but they've been working on injecting bacteria or stuff that counteracts what the chemicals are that are down there. That's a cleanup effort. Obviously gas stations, a lot of times you have cleanups with that. You've got Browncroft and Creek Atlantic. That one kind of sits empty, but you see a little trailer sitting next to it. Each one kind of does a little bit different. Used to have the property at the corner of Plank and Empire, the old hubcap station. They chose to just dig it all up and aerate it and flip it over. So you'd see a pile of dirt and they'd flip it over and let it aerate out and take care of that. You see the one at Browncroft and Atlantic. They've got a little trailer parked off to the left of the building. It has a vacuum system in it, so they keep sucking fumes out of the ground. It's a much longer system that takes it. And then you had the mobile former gas station here at the corner of 250 and Atlantic. They just decided we're going to dig it all up, truck it off, and pay to take it to a hazardous waste or contaminated landfill.
Well, and actually, in that case, Mobile was actually a prior operator at that location, and Mobile has taken on the responsibility of going up and cleaning a lot of these stations up, but they're also getting tax credits for doing that. It's not that they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, they're doing it because they're getting compensated for it. But at least they're doing it, and that's the important thing, because they're bringing the value back to the properties.
Yep. Yeah, because there's the one station in the corner of Blossom and Browncroft. It's a pizza parlor now. They took the tanks out. And,
Yep.
Cares.
Yep. Haven't had it yet, but it seems.
You can pretty much bet
busy, so
if it's an old station, they've had some
That's what
type of
I guess.
contamination problem.
Little gassy smell too.
Yeah. Don't get the thin crust.
It was after you.
So there's many different ways to mitigate it. The Ruoff property, which we purchased several years ago, is now attached to LaSalle's Landing Park on Empire Boulevard. That had some contamination on it. We had to truck that off to a contaminated waste area. The other side of Empire Boulevard, there's some contamination that's old ash, slag from Russell Station and whatnot. That is, they said, basically be more issue to remove it and more impact to get into the water source and the environment, so it's better to cap it. There's mini storage down there, so it can't be used for housing, it can't be used for residential living, but as long as it's capped and covered, it's better off just to kind of leave it alone than dig it back up. So,
Now, when you locate these sites, my assumption is that I hate to use the term perpetrator, but we go after the folks that are, if possible, responsible.
If possible, but most of these were done back in the 40s and Empire Boulevard. A lot of Empire Boulevard was contaminated back in the 40s and 50s. Those people are all gone now. People have since bought those properties, and they're innocent in the sense that they've never done anything to contribute to the contamination, but they are stuck with it.
Yeah, they're stuck
You
with
know?
it, okay.
And they are limiting, because you really can't do a lot without mitigating the site, and it's so expensive to do that, you're probably not gonna be able to build what you need to build in order to get the money back. That's
I mean, there's
a good example of that
stuff.
was Water's Edge down in Empire Boulevard. We said, well, it's pretty dense. It is dense, but they had to spend millions of dollars to mitigate that site in order to protect the groundwater going into a runaway bay, which they did. They had to spend millions of dollars for road improvements to put a middle turn lane in down there to make it safer. So all these things add up to a point where you have to justify being able to do it.
Yep.
There's no provided state grants to help.
Sometimes you can get
Some of those
brownfield.
There's a brownfield grant, and the brownfield grant, you do the work, and then you determine what the cost was and what the benefit's gonna be to you, and then they adjust for that through a calculation. and give you what they
The
think
Carrots
is
Cleaner site in Panorama is working with the DEC through some funding to get that cleaned up. The people that bought it obviously weren't the ones that contaminated it. You know, they're trying to mitigate it and
Yeah.
clean it up, so there is some grant funding out there to help them with that. So, you know, we try to, if we have identified areas, obviously, you know, work with whoever buys it, wants to develop it to, you know, clean it up properly, make sure it's done. Go on, yeah, go on.
Tell them about the lead harvesting at the ski club next door.
Yeah, so we actually had the gun club just next door to us. They came in and, you know, decided to, I think the first time ever, do, you know, harvesting the lead shot on their site. And you think, first, how do they do it? I mean, lead's not magnetic. You think if, you know, you run it through a sieve or something like that, you could take it out. They had a group that came in that had kind of a unique system that they stripped off the topsoil in the, say, the field area, wherever the lead shot falls, stripped the topsoil off, they kind of ground it all up so there's no more grass and clumps, and then they dumped it in this machine. They liquefied it. They liquefied the soil, spun it around, and basically a centrifuge, the fingers went out, the lead shot went to the outside and dropped, the other soil went down the bottom and dumped out as a liquid, went through a little trench and, you know, dewatered it, aired it back out. They took over 400,000 pounds of lead shot off of that property.
Since the 40s.
Since the 40s. So they took off, I think, 10 tractor trailer trucks full of lead shot went off, and it goes
Did you say
to
10?
10 tractor trailer loads. So they take it goes to Indiana and release this group. Indiana, they put it back into lead vests, lead pencils, you know, anything, whatever, new shot for shotgun or whatever. But that's something they went through on their own. But they actually, you know, gained money out of it. One, it cleaned up their site, and two, I don't know how much, but, you know, they got some money back from the company. They took the lead, took it back, and, you know, reprocessed it. So, you know, we don't look at that as a contaminated site. The lead is not, you know, it's contained in a pellet. It's in the ground. I mean, you wouldn't want to dump it into the water, but, you know, it's a contained thing. So we don't look at it as a contaminated site. But that's one spot that, you know, they came to us and said, we're cleaning it up, and here's what we're doing. And it worked out well.
That whole, not industry, but recreation is changing too now with the type of shot used and getting away from lead. Kind of unique situation.
I think that takes us down through remediated contaminated sites. So we've got 20 minutes. Do you want to call it good, or do you want to push on and do transportation? I can keep talking fast in
Is
20
that a
minutes.
push to keep
That's a
going, or
push.
let's go? I couldn't tell where you're going.
Guys are moderated.
Let's go.
Okay, transportation.
We need to go home and have a beer.
We'll make it fast. You can have two.
Keep the cars
three.
moving.
Or three.
Keep the cars moving.
So transportation, some of the recommendations talked about strengthening our partnerships with GTC, which is the Genesee Transportation Council, which handles studies for 7 county region area, state DOT, the county DOT, and RGRTA. We have annual meetings with the state DOT. We meet with them every spring. Again, not saying just as FEMA, we don't really tell them what to do, but I think we're one of the only towns that comes and meets with them and shares our concerns about, capacity on roads, road quality, issues we see with culverts, planning ahead with them on different projects. So hopefully we can kind of at least put a little bug in their ear if and when they're coming in with a project. The culvert that's on the curve right by Baird Road, the thing's deteriorating. I'm putting a bug in their ear if and when you guys replace that culvert, make it wide enough so I can put a sidewalk on it and we can connect two neighborhoods together. You should look at, the intersection of 5 Mile Atlantic. They're probably looking at that right now for a roundabout on it. That had 5 times the statewide average of accidents on it. So between the transportation committee and whatever.
That's probably the most efficient intersection in all of Penfield. Yeah.
Oh, it's horrible.
So we've,
I don't think
again,
a
we
roundabout's-
don't tell the state what to do, but I think at least we kind of try to poke them along and say, you need to look at this. They're the ones that came up and said, let's do a roundabout, rather than turn lanes, and it's looking at acquiring land and what's available in that area. But I think, we try every year to sit down with the state and kind of go through, hey, we're looking at Atlantic Avenue. We've been bugging them about that for years, about the quality of the pavement and starting to get potholes in it and ruts in it.
Are you talking about where it comes from, right down to Ellison Park, huh?
That's Blossom.
Yeah.
So Blossom, they did a
Not
little-
Blossom, I'm talking about the 4-lane highway that's 55 miles an hour for 1.5 miles.
From Browncroft?
Yeah,
Right from,
Yeah.
right.
yeah.
Almost Creek Street
I mean,
over
it seems like
Five
that road deteriorates.
Even out in front of the town hall here.
I'd say
I mean,
this
we actually,
area
I
here
mean,
is worse.
we live over there. I actually take Blossom home because the New York State is so terrible at maintaining whatever contractor they have to maintain that little piece. In the wintertime, you don't ever want to drive up and down that
You know,
hill.
my
It's
favorite
Blossom.
feature of that one is, George, you're going down, you hit that first bridge, the water goes right across the bridge if it's really raining. You will, every time.
Well, it's got a
Every
little pump
time
to
the
it too,
back
so it
end
pops you
will-
up a little bit.
Oh, yeah, no,
It's-
there was a divot or something they were fixing for a long time and they'd fix it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then if you weren't paying attention,
It
it sunk
sunk.
down again. It would sink down from 1 hour to the next and you'd hit that. I watched tires fly
The
off.
water
and-
authority had a blowout on, just as you get over that and kind of start to go up the other side, there was a water
So
line
if we
break.
can collaboratively work with the state to do a better job on that, I'm all for
We
that.
leverage
yeah.
them all the time. Empire Boulevard, they actually have a project letting, this spring is supposed to be construction this summer, to redo Empire Boulevard all the way from Arundecoit all the way to Gravel Road. They're gonna be adding a middle turn lane, up by Plank Road, so as you kind of make that left, they can add a middle turn lane in there. Unfortunately, it's not going all the way down the hill. We've been trying to leverage them to do that, but that's not in there. But they said as that one's done, then they'll look at Atlantic. Blossom Road, as you come up out of the park, that was falling apart. We kind of nudged them to at least mill and patch that right lane a little bit to fix that. We had a little Band-Aid, but that kind of got through that. But we're seeing a lot of heavy truck traffic coming out of Walworth, especially coming down Atlantic this way from here, and you kind of see that right lane is settling, and there's a lot of impact from that. So
They have been giving us a lot of support over the last few years.
and I think meeting with them helps. I mean, we just
Oh,
kinda
yeah,
keep
because if you're
buzzing in
building
their ear
camaraderie
and
with
giving
them,
them
then
some
yeah.
stuff with it. We meet with the county DOT regularly. The Genesee Transportation Council, we've got some grant funding for them. The mixed-use development was the first of its kind to look at a pedestrian-oriented, to have the Genesee Transportation Council pay for a study to look at creating a mixed-use development for walkability, bikeability. They're looking at alternatives to get people out of cars and everything else. So that was kind of a first for a transportation group to pay for something alternate to the normal highways and everything with that. So we try to keep those partnerships up, meet with them, talk about what they've got on the horizon, what we're looking at for new development, where we see areas of of construction and expansion. So hopefully they can kind of keep up with their road systems. So continue to implement management techniques, obtain sufficient right-of-way, if and when we know there's gonna be a road expansion. 5 Mile Atlantic, we acquired additional right-of-way from that developer. So at that corner, the tree is kind of far back. There's no houses on the corner. The town of Penfield has acquired that property. So it's easier for us to transfer ownership to the state than from an individual property owner. So whenever they're coming into the project, we can say, yeah, we're supportive. If you need turn lanes, if you need a roundabout,
You're talking about, okay.
here, we acquired all that
I see
property.
how it bumps out here.
So that was a
At
past
Line
one.
Jocks, we did a similar thing
On
on.
Terrace Hill, we took some
the east
additional
side.
property. We own that entire corner on the east side, so if and when they come in, we can say, here's what land you need, you can accommodate turn lanes, you can fit in roundabouts.
And this is where they're talking about putting the roundabout.
Yes.
We did a little advanced planning when it came to that subdivision, that we were gonna make sure we get an extra right of way through the road there.
Ah, okay.
Um,
Well, I mean, I guess the more general question then on that, which is, when you've got these types of things in play where we know that there are problem areas, is there like a kind of, I'll say, a defined list? Here's areas we've gone to the state and said, here's where we need some help, and do we need to, as a group, look at those in a little bit more detail as part of the planning?
and we can, as we go through it, we kind of keep a running list of areas that.
Well, I was kind of
we
asking
see
that
in-
to the group, if they think
Yeah.
that there'd be some value in that or not.
It'll be, still, transportation's always a topic.
And I think that's continued good planning or looking to the future is, not, the answer isn't always make it wider. I mean, we've looked at what the impact 441's had on the four corners and what the village setting is. Sometimes the first answer is let's add another travel lane, let's make it wider. You build it, they will come. You kind of have, the opposite effect with some of that stuff. I know Victor's looking at with 96 is, do they make that a 4-lane highway through there? They can, look at cars through there faster when you have the backup, but, do you lose the character of what the village is and what makes what they have, special? So, there's always kind of a balance between moving people faster and quicker and, giving up, your community wants and needs. So we talked about obtaining right-of-way, implementing transportation studies. We continue to do that. We continue to update what we have. Looking at accident data, we constantly have traffic counters out as people go by in the street. You see the little black tubes out. We're counting traffic as far as speed and volume. So that leads into intelligent transportation system technologies, so we can count data. With that, partner with adjacent communities to plan infrastructure. We often meet with Webster and Perrington, see what they've got going on in development on either side with them. We meet with Brighton as well, then meet with them talking about Helens Creek and stormwater and what impacts. We try to keep a good relationship with the adjacent communities as well as the county. We meet regularly with the county and state DOT. The bike master plan, I think it was last done in 2008, if I have the date right. That may be something subsequent or an update, kind of after the comp plan's done, if the comp plan's kind of done, and then there may be a next update to look at that. That's something we keep, active to look at, especially as we've gotten into mixed use, is building multi-use trails, bikeable areas. I think that's something that's going to come up in the Shadow Pines area. Is there going to be dedicated space for biking as well as hiking, multi-use areas with that. We continue to work with the state. They did where you can, we've actually gone the other way, do a road diet. If you've been on Panorama Trail, which turns into up towards Washington Street in East Rochester, they've done a road diet on that area where we actually took a 4-lane highway with middle turn lanes and tried to shrink it down a little bit, provide some bike space, bike lane areas, provide a middle turn lane, try to make it safer, but also to make it a multimodal, to have bike areas. We looked at that for Empire Boulevard. Unfortunately, Empire is over their limit. They basically say 25,000 cars a day is kind of the limit of what you can do at. We were at 29 at the time, and I'm sure growing. Basically would have no gapping. So we looked at, could you make Empire Boulevard a 2-way road with a middle turn lane down the whole thing? They basically just said the flow would be so constant if you were on a side street to pull in, you just never would have any gapping in order to pull in and out.
For the town's perspective, who's our expert that could address this stuff?
Transportation-wise, we do it in the engineering department, and if it's outside of our scope, we have consultants on contract to bring them in. So the engineering department, we look at it, and if it's outside of what we think we can handle, we've either got SRF, which is a local expert on traffic studies. They do a lot. Unfortunately, so we've got two actually. We've got SRF and we've got Barton and Judas on contract. We only use them, we pay them when we need them. A lot of times SRF does a plan, so we can't have them review the same plan that's been submitted. We've used other engineering firms. If Baytown Plaza came in, they were synchronizing 4 lights that would be on my scope of transportation knowledge on timing of lights. That one I think we had Bergman, I think was our consultant on that one, review that to the developer. We back charged the developer the cost of it, but they looked at, how do you synchronize all the lights at Baytown Plaza. You've got the one at Creek and
20 turning
Bay,
lanes.
you've got the one coming out of the plaza, you've got the one at Wegmans and the one.
I only asked
headed
because
together.
we had Chris come address us about recreation needs tonight, who would be the person to come address us about transportation?
Yep, and we can have the, you know, if you want a consultant to come in, we can have them come in and talk to us. We've got Terry Rice on contract. Terry used to be the head of the Monroe County DOT. He's now retired from the county and has gone back into consulting work. So he's kind of our expert and could come in if we had questions and wanted him to.
Yeah, that'd be a good Q&A
Talk to the
type
group about
situation if you have
His
questions
experience
about
with
that.
it. We do have a transportation committee. We can have.
Is there someone from the transportation committee that you could maybe be the starting point?
I'm on it. I mean, I kind of.
I was gonna say, Mark, it seems all signs seem to be pointing to you in this, just as we're discussing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we have representatives, residents from both the county and the state on it. We try to have a county sheriff there so we can kind of balance between, you know, talking what they do for policing enforcement end of it. You know, we get requests for every street. Everybody wants speed humps on every street. Everybody wants a stop sign at every stop. Everybody wants, you know, no parking signs along all sides of the street. So you obviously you got to balance getting people from A to B and moving them through versus public safety and you know, as well as the police to issue a ticket for every no parking sign on their end of it. So obviously it's a lot of give and take back and forth with that. But yeah, we can have Terry Rice come in and talk to the group about, you know, transportation master planning. I think that's going to be something we haven't updated our, I think, 2002. To my recollection, it's the last time we did a town-wide transportation master plan. I could see that being a recommendation coming out of this, is to again look at a master plan or an overall traffic study for the town. We kind of handle doing analysis as new projects come in. We'll put traffic counters out ahead of a new project.
Or they give us
After they
studies.
come out, they provide studies to us. Smaller stuff we handle in-house, or, you know, larger projects, we farm those out.
I'd be curious if there's any talk of accommodating self-driving cars with respect to transportation. I mean, it sounds so futuristic and sci-fi, but 10 years ago we all had flip phones, and now we've all got smartphones. And just when this
Yeah.
stuff takes off, it's there.
And they were saying that, you know, it was 20 years, now they're saying it's stuff coming out at CES this week, they're saying it's 10 years or less. We're gonna start seeing that's how fast the technology's taking off,
There's
so.
millions of hours
I mean,
of
look
road
at
time
something
already, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid point, and it seems that, I like the idea of revisiting the townwide planning, because it kind of sounds like we're piecemealing this project, so we're gonna look here, it's not really maybe as comprehensive as you would like it for the whole town, and what does the flow of traffic look like, and where we think, and again, self-driving cars, what's the impact to that? I don't know what the impact to that is, does anybody here?
We've already even seen, we've reduced our requirement for parking. We used to say 5.4 parking spaces per 1,000 required for a plaza. Now you see huge expanses of parking at a Wegmans or
Per
Walmart or
1,000
something
square
else.
foot for the building.
Sometimes Walmart demands and says, no, I need this many parking spaces. But we've seen more and more businesses say, I don't need that many spaces, whether people are doing online shopping, whether people do stuff at different times. So we've taken that and counted in our own planning. We're down to 5.0, and I can see us reducing our requirement. If a developer or somebody says, I need more because of this, before we said, you have to provide at least this many parking spaces.
Yep.
You know, you don't need to plan for everybody to be at the mall on Christmas Day. That's a one day a year. You try to plan for something less than that. And now, as I think we see, you know, retail going online, we can see parking being less and less. We haven't gotten there yet, but we've even talked about self-driving cars, that what's the impact on a parking lot? You can have all the cars wedge themselves in with zero clearance between cars. You don't really need spaces to open doors. They could drop you off at the door, you hop out, your car goes and parks in the back spot, 10 cars pack in around it, you need your car back, you hit the button, all the other cars move automatically, you get your car out. Parking lots could again continue to squeeze, and so I mean, those are things, obviously we're not there yet, but, you know, things, you know, we'll look at and keep in mind as we develop or modify our code, to hopefully we can have less parking spaces and reduce that and have more green space and, you know, keep less of the property, you know, or more of the property undeveloped.
Probably one of the short-term things you're gonna see is just bigger roads to accommodate the paths that these vehicles would need, so that they kind of know where they are more, and so they have more spacing between each other. It's like probably one of the first impacts is that you're gonna see design criteria change.
Well, the other thing we have to think about too is mass transit, because Rochester Transit now is looking at modifying their routes. trying to serve the communities, community to community, rather than using them as spokes to come into the city. So that's gonna be something to look at as well.
And we have conversations with RGRTA, and then with mixed use, we've talked about, is there a possibility of having, other than, I'm not aware of any other bus line that goes from Greece to Strong Hospital, is the only non-downtown route that currently exists.
Well, yeah.
Like
Every other one goes from
With
suburb to
yeah.
city to.
Public transportation is almost, I mean, it seemed to be a requirement for any kind of a mixed-use area. You need to be able to have public transport in
And
and
that's,
out of there, yeah.
we've been talking to them about, is there a possibility of a north-south route starting in the village of Webster, going to Penfield, going to Fairport, going to the mall? You know, if you could have something
More of a
kind of
local-
outside of a local route going north-south, you know, if it's senior-oriented or stuff, and people that don't want to drive, or could take mass transit and, you know, get away from a car, you know, is there benefit to that? So we've been talking to RGRT about, you know, providing that. Most of their other stuff goes from suburb into the city, you catch your hub, and then you go, you know, out to, you know, any other location. So you know, that'll be a change for them as well. We talked about bike master plan, trail master plan. I think Chris kind of touched upon that. You know, that kind of subsequent to, you know, the rec master plan, town sidewalk policy. We recently just updated that. We actually just increased our fees. So we as a town, you know, look to, you know, have sidewalks installed with any new development along their frontage, both sides internal. Where it's not deemed appropriate, they pay basically an impact fee. They don't install the sidewalks, but they pay money back to the general sidewalk fund, and then that allows us to kind of go back and fill in some gaps. We've got sidewalks planned down on Empire Boulevard. We've been doing those. This past year, we again extended a little piece down Browncroft from Baird going westward. We're looking to kind of connect the sidewalks that the new development just put in. We upgraded some sidewalks down in Willow Pond. We have a senior area down there that now has a handicap accessible route to get to Wegmans, so they come out of the Willow Pond. You've got, what's the facility?
Legacy.
Legacy, thank you. Legacy.
Legacy.
Legacy, we've got, you know, handicap route that you can get to Wegmans from there, so, you know, we leverage what the developers put in on their frontage and then go back through and, you know, fill in the gaps. So if we've got developers paying into the sidewalk fund, or sidewalks aren't deemed necessary in their area, then that can help to fund those different additional pieces. Multimodal considerations, we've talked about mixed use and having, you know, both combined biking and
The Empire
walking
Boulevard
paths.
will have a total bike path through it, once the state gets done next
We're
year.
looking at sidewalks. There's still gonna be a kind of a gap in that middle wetland area, where the state is, that little
bridge.
pull-off. The state's still kind of figuring out what they're gonna do with that space. Updating ADA requirements. We have to develop an ADA accessibility plan, as most communities have to look at upgrading our facilities as well as keeping sidewalks current. Updating components to meet the aging population. Again, we looked at, and we've talked about the, you know, ped crossings at intersections. We've talked about the truncated domes. You know, if somebody's visually impaired or low vision, you have to have it to indicate that you're about to cross an intersection. Traffic calming measures. We always look at, you know, now we're looking at complete streets. We look at, you know, planting trees along the streets. If it feels closer in, you drive slower.
Street parking.
We try to have grid connections so you can kind of spread out traffic, but not always a straight shot between streets. You try to, you know, have streets meander a little bit so it slows people down, but have interconnected areas. New streets are designed to limit the potential for speeding and cut-throughs. Traffic control, we are looking at the roundabouts, you know, with the state on that. Alternate techniques, travel impacts in the community. Again, everybody's always kind of talking about speed humps and bumps, but we've tried to kind of stay away from that, and we've used, you know, either law enforcement or signage or other stuff to.
Yeah, I'd imagine that you'd have a hell of a time in some of these neighborhoods. The fire marshal would have a fit if you try to put speed bumps.
The plow trucks in the wintertime and emergency vehicles trying to get through, and people don't like speed humps, so
Lots of them don't.
they either race between them, so you kind of go from 0 to 60 to 0 to.
Oh, yeah, God forbid you're the piece of property between the two, because then you get to listen to the engines around.
Yeah,
which
or
is
people like to drive around them
End up in the
and
front
they don't
yard.
like to
Oh,
be
you
on
even
them,
have-
so they swing into front yards and around, and you've seen rocks and posts and stuff that people try to prevent that, but people, you know, swing around the outside of them, so now you've taken the traffic from in the road to in the front yard.
Seen ascension even in the streets, some of them want them, some of them don't want them in their street. They just don't wanna deal with it, others do wanna deal with it.
Only have one for a reason.
We've talked about traffic implementation, incorporate transit accommodations to future land use, higher density, commercial, residential, mixed use, which we've been working on, work with our GRTA on that. Promote accommodations for non-motorized transportation options. Again, we're looking at multimodal trails for bikes, accommodating bikes on the roads. We work with the state if they can at least, pave a bike lane on the side, stripe an area for
Make a
bikers
shoulder
to be
wider.
safe, have a wider shoulder, develop mixed-use areas, which I've been working on, and then provide bus service to commercial areas and park and ride, so.
Doing any zoning code modifications for bike parking?
Bike racks?
Parking?
Not just bike racks per se, but that's part of it, but also like create actual shelters like in the case of multifamily developments.
We haven't yet for shelters, obviously anytime we have a new development, we work with the planning
I've
board or
seen
town
that.
works to put in bike racks at
As a
different
recommendation
facilities.
in the active transportation plan.
Okay, yeah, we haven't dealt with that yet, but it's,
Right, you know, we talk about reducing parking, but in turn.
Give someone a place to put a bike too.
I mean, I know we talked about, the new Baytown Plaza, Walmart, having a bus shelter there designated with, having a, nearby spot you can put the cart, people are gonna wheel out and then just dump the cart there, so we can try to accommodate that as well as having, shelters so people are out of the weather for using that. So try to coordinate all the groups with that. I know I charged through transportation. Any questions on that section? I think we have 3 sections left. Zach, you want to read what we've got?
Yep, we have 3 left: economic opportunities, community character and design, and government and leadership. We will keep pressing to get these things done so we can start getting into your recommendations, evaluations, get some guests in here, keep the process moving forward so it's less of us talking and more of your discussion so we get through this education piece.
So I'd say look ahead at those 3 sections. Your next meeting's on the 22nd. Hopefully we can try to get through those 3 sections in that meeting, and then we'll look at, we start bringing in more guests and stuff to speak about transportation or talk about DPW needs or talk about, what other accommodation wants we have. We'll start highlighting areas of town that, we've been driving around and looking at that, we're needing some updates and whether those should be rezoned or considerations of that. We'll talk about the golf courses and what's the future of those pieces and where are those going. Hopefully in that time frame we'll have some feedback from the Shadow Pines Committee. They've had their conversations and hopefully they'll have a recommendation coming forth shortly. So once we kind of get through this last bit of education, then we'll kind of start moving on where do we go next and looking at areas. And again, we'll follow your lead on who do we want to bring in, who do we want to have discussions with, what information do you need, who do you want to talk to. So, threw a lot at you tonight. We're a few minutes over. My apologies for that, but thanks for coming.
Thank you.